morning, good afternoon. This is John Gunnan broadcasting from the West Coast, Newport Beach, California, and I want to welcome you to the Art History Review. We've been really focusing in on what questions you're going to get on the coming exam. I know that we've been talking a lot about continuity and change, and today we'll be focusing in on some very creative comparisons. So I'm going to now share my screen, and we have some interesting things, and I'm going to be asking you to do some interesting things today as well. So I'll start off with a little art detective. We know this game. I show you a fragment of a piece and you go, I know what that is, because that person has a little tiny bit of an archaic smile, right? So you know that it is the Koros figure from archaic Greece. And while I have this up, I just had, because some of the folks have been writing in and asking a little more about continuity and change, I just wanted to put up the spear bearer next to it, and we could see that there is a great example here of continuity and change. Two idealized male nudes made out of marble, yes. One influenced by the other, but the one on the right, has developed in ways that we could trace back to the prosperity of the culture, and it's innovated new things. So another way you could really think of continuity and change is tradition and innovation. It's a similar type of thing. Okay, let's do another one. I know you recently saw this, and you're thinking of the Lamassu. Here in Los Angeles, we have a giant mall, and it was a Uniroyal tire factory that they changed into a mall, and it has, it's modeled on the Citadel, and it has giant Lamassu up on top of the buildings. And so I always have students that are driving down the freeway and sending me pictures from that. I did want to point out too that both of these works, the Koros and the Lamassu, have in common a stylized hair. Stylization, I always explain it as, this is the way we do hair, bubble, bubble, bubble. This is the way we do hair, spiral, spiral, spiral. And so it's not observed really, it's not individualized, it is stylized or generalized, you could say. Okay. So now I have a couple of Pictionaries for you. I challenge you to yell out this name. What is this thing you are looking at? And if you said Bundu mask, yes, the initiation society for the girls coming of age. And how about this one? Okay, I think you just yelled out the serpent mound from Ohio. Okay, and I wanted to pause on this because today we are going to look at some works from Indigenous Americas set. You know that that's one of the things that'll be on your test, and we'll be comparing some of them today. So when I saw this work, I also wanted to remind you that tomorrow is Earth Day, and I know that Allison talked about that yesterday, but that's kind of an interesting thing. 50 years. Okay, and we remember that Earth Day, when that first came out, Robert Smithson was very interested in the environment, and it was a big movement. It was getting a lot of people's attention, as it does today. But I thought that this was a great comparison, and there might be some things going through your heads right now, but I wanted to just convince you that writing comparisons in art history is wonderfully creative. It's almost as if, well, it's like that question of, you know, if you could have dinner with 3 famous people, who would they be? Or if you could be the matchmaker for any 2 Hollywood stars, who would you put together? These kinds of fun what if questions. You know, when you put these artworks next to each other, they kind of reflect back on each other. And of course, obviously right here we have the spiral, and you know, a monumental works that can be seen from a satellite. And so I think that's a outstanding thing. We've learned about the spiral jetty. Let's take just a minute and talk about this serpent mound, because one of the interesting things about our set in all is that there's pieces that we know a lot about. The spiral jetty, we have heavy documentations, we have all of Smithson's records and sketches and sketchbooks and his ideas, him talking about the work. But on the Serpent Mound, it's a very mysterious society. In fact, there's still theories and debate about exactly which group of people made it. And as you can see here, I love these kinds of questions. Well, what is this really doing? Um, you know, the one end of it points to each of the solstices. If I can go to the uh, plan really of the Snake Mound, that like Stonehenge, this tells time. It tells the passage of the seasons. We talked about the Aztec temple the other day, does that, shows the equinoxes, which are March and September. This one shows the solstices by pointing, lining up with that celestial event. And then I just thought there's a wonderful essay on smart history. I highly recommend that essay. And these are just all the theories of, well, what are we looking at here? And it's fun. And maybe there's some thing that you see that you know is not there. But again, it's taking a work that we really rather know little about and just seeing how far we can get, because there's definitely some works like that in the image set. I know another one is the Inca, the golden corncob. I have a lot of trouble finding things on that work, and but that's history for you, right? You can know a little or you can know a lot. So on comparisons, the other day we looked at two religious works, both from printmaking tradition and both the Northern Renaissance. And yes, you can compare these works, but I think you're more likely on the AP test to maybe get a cross-cultural comparison, because this is within one culture. So I would say that something like this, there's a piece on the left from Africa, there's a piece on the right from the colonial Americas, New Spain, and they're very distant and far, but they have a connection, at least for me. So I want to convince you to think in terms of themes today. And so the theme I've come up with here is history and memory, and we'll try to trace that theme a little ways today and see how that will work out. But you know, both of these have to do with telling stories, telling what happened, documenting things. And I think history and memory is a wonderful theme. You know, you might think about, well, what are some other themes that are possible? And I know that your teacher probably relied on themes a little bit in the art history class, because it is a really great way to go through the class. All right, so before we do the comparison and before you start comparing, I just want to remind you a little bit about this Lukasa object. And I know you studied it in the class, but I want to go back through it again. And I found a couple of others. I actually was lucky enough to see a show at LA County Museum of Art a couple years ago on the Luba people and Luba sculpture. And they had a number of Lukasas. So you can see how they fit together. There's variation, but yet there's similarities in the group. A lot of things in the art history curriculum are types of objects that are common and not just a one of a kind. Okay, so here in our text, we can say Lukasa. Now, if you forgot that word, Lukasa, you could probably say memory board, because there it is in the title. And then the group of people that's produced this is the Luba. However, you'll notice there's a special society, and yes, it's a kind of a prestigious society, the Mubuji Society. So this object is in the province of that society. Okay, and then you'll notice it's fairly new in time, because in the African work, a lot of those works don't go back that far in time. I think there's a couple of works from maybe the 1700s, but a lot of those works are wood And some, wood is vulnerable to destruction, maybe in a way that fired clay and bronze are not. But remember that in identification, you have to name two of the signifiers. Okay, but let's talk a little bit about this Mubudji society, because it's has to do with history, with telling, with reciting things about the society. Okay, and some of the things that it could recite about or could talk about are court ceremonies, cultural heroes, geography, and migrations, and also the genealogy of the rulers. So sort of a history and lore of the important people in the society. But the interesting thing is that it's performed. Now, when you see in your set an object, but then a picture of someone using it, like that man, that's very important. And it means that they just don't want you to know about this object itself, but that it's performed, and he is telling the story, the history of the tribe. So in essence, he is a historian. And what's even better about this is that the historian has some free reign about ordering the history, or determining the history. And so in a way, it's sort of like a check and balance against the king. So you have someone who's telling the story that's not the king. Okay, so just map wise, Democratic Republic of the Congo, there we go. And there's other peoples in that area. It's a very rich area, a lot of tropical rainforests in that area. And then I really like this um, sort of definition of the Lukasa, a mnemonic device. Now I'm always giving you things like the 4 Fs or the 3 Ls, or making little words that help you order and remember things. I like to do that. And of course, now I guess we're talking about the 3 Cs, right? That's what your AP test is about, right? The 3 Cs: comparison, continuity, and change. I think if you go in there expecting to do those 3 things, you're going to luck out. So anyway, there you see some of the things that the Lukasa can recall or talk about. And then the second bubble there is the historian. What the historian really does is maintains and transmits knowledge and interprets history through reciting. So it's like the oral tradition. Now I have some really nice pictures, some really clear pictures. Some of these I took with my iPhone, but they're closer up than you can sometimes normally get. So, if I told you, okay, your assignment today is to go home and make me one of these, you'd get out some wood and you'd look for some buttons or something like that, and some Elmer's glue, and you'd get a knife out and start hacking away, right? So there you can see some things. I'd like you to show you a picture from my book on the Luba. Now, I don't expect you to know or remember this stuff, but it's interesting to me that they got one of the historian guys to actually talk about the way he uses the Luba. Because what it is I guess when you get that thing out and you start touching it and looking at it, it jogs your memory. But since it's oral tradition, I would wager that your story is vulnerable to change and could change a little bit every time you told it. Here are some of the different tellers. Okay, so it's definitely a position of power to be able to tell the story. Okay, Pierre Nora is a famous French historian, and I really like this quote because it's like telling us that history and memory are different things. And I know that sometimes I get together with friends and we start telling stories from things that happened a long time ago. And I'm always surprised at how different the stories come out. It's just like, did that really happen? And so I wonder if that's ever happened to you. Now, here are some interesting questions. Do we have anything that functions like a Lukasa? Well, if you look at that picture of the man, it reminds me of break time at school when all the students are looking at their phones. Okay, he's really in dialogue with this thing. And then the second question, could you make an abstract or symbolic map of your own history or your neighborhood? What would you do if you had to do this? You've had a little image that had to jog your memory to be able to tell things. And of course, the last thing I like to always say is that this object is a memory board, but it reminds me of, don't we have a memory board inside computers? I don't know. So what would you compare this to if you went outside Africa and you had to pick another work? Okay, let's do that. So here are some of the image that I was thinking of, and I'm really zooming in on this idea of knowledge in history. And so here's some of the things, but what I chose for us to do is this one. Okay, now this is the Codex Mendoza. It's from the colonial Americas. And we'll review it a little, and then I'm going to let you have some thoughts comparing it to the Lukasa. So this work, Mendoza, by the way, was the viceroy of New Spain. So that means he was like the king in the New World. Okay, the vice king, if you will. And this was a history of the Aztecs. And it was made by Aztec artists, but then it was annotated in Spanish afterwards to sort of explain to the king, what was going on. Okay, and then I do have in here one more picture of it, and one more picture because this is only the front page. When you get these pages of manuscripts, you have to really zoom in on that one page. So you can see here that it's got the eagle and the snake image. And we know that that image turns up in Mexico a lot. It's a founding image of the city of Tenochtitlan. Okay, and then down at the bottom, you can see the Aztecs, warriors conquering other peoples. And of course, how do you know which ones they are? You can say hierarchical scale. I know you're saying that wherever you are right now. Going around the the different squares is kind of the epochs or the eras. Okay. Here is the identifying information. It's kind of interesting to me that they said ink and color. That's a little unspecific, but how do you get colors and make colors? That's an interesting science of art. What plants and stones and minerals can be ground up and emulsified into colors. There's whole books out on that. I always encourage students, if you're very good at science, there's a lot of applications to art history as well, a lot of nice combinations. Okay, so here's that other page I was talking about. This is like a almanac type thing almost. It shows all of the different, shows what they ate, what they wore, what they believed in, all kinds of interesting things. So history and memory. What would you say if you had to compare these two? You'd have to first discuss the function of each and show that you know something about, or that you knew something about each, I'm sorry. And then what would be some of the comparative connections, the things that you might discuss in an essay? I'm going to give you 1 minute to just think about that, and you can count on your fingers like this and that, or you can jot it down on a piece of paper. Okay, go. Okay, so what I hope you're focusing on here and you're feeling is some richness that occurs when you start to compare, and how two objects can really reflect back some interesting things. One of the things I was thinking of, there's many ideas, of course, but the Lukasa is really used inside that society. They're not broadcasting to the world outside themselves about things, but it's really within their society, and that this object, it really is the a prologue, or the sort of springboard to an oral performance. Okay, very unlike the other one, which is something that someone could sit down and study and learn from, almost like an encyclopedia. Okay, so that would be one idea. And of course, this one on the right is broadcasting to the outside world. Here is this new group of people that we found, and here's what they do and what they're like. The subject of the ones on the left would be by and large centered on the royalty, the royal court, the prestige people of the group, whereas the other group, the Codex Mendoza, really keeps track of all the things going on in society, and so everyone is the subject. It's a document, of course, with many pages, as we've seen. So I'm interested to know and what some of the thoughts you might have had. But remember that these comparison, you can get really deep and really creative about what you think. So here is a comparison of the codex, which carries a lot of this information. And then there is the Inca tunic, which also carries a lot of information, also shows prestige and power. And I know we did look at it in a previous session. But let's review a little bit. There is a tokapu on top on the left. It's just one of the things. But what we get is the all tokapu. So this tunic is really for the king because it has all of the different emblems of all the different parts of their society that's all come together, different peoples, different jobs. And of course, my favorite is the checkerboard because I remember that one's of the military. Okay, it's ink, plant and camelid, which is the the alpacas and things like that are up there. This is a nice illustration of weaving the things that was done by a special, an elite group of women. A very, very important job, and they were sequestered from other people to produce these works. I don't understand myself, technically the things about weaving and stuff. I know there's people out in my audience today that have done this, that have made things, but my mind doesn't work like this. But I'm just showing you we've figured out. And of course, these are luxurious and rich objects. Now, I did take this picture, and I could get real close up to it at a museum exhibition, also at the Getty Museum. Okay, so what would be some other comparisons you could make with this? I thought of what you saw yesterday in the Bayeux Tapestry. So you have a weaving on the left and an embroidery on the right. And then if you're looking at that scene and you're going, well, that's not really the one, is it? This is the one from your set. Yes, I know, but I know you knew because that piece is 60 meters long or something. It goes on and on and on. So there's lots of different parts to it, but I think you can tell about the style of it right there. Okay, so what are some other possible things? Let's go through and keep going. I want to get to this hide painting on the right, and then we're going to come back and compare it again. Okay, so let's review this a little bit. Cotsiago, we know the artist. I think that's great because a lot of times in the sets like Indigenous Americas in Africa, we don't know the artist, but there's some important times where we do, that, these peoples that are sometimes far away and opaque had their own superstar artists within their group. Okay, so let's get a real close-up look at this. I know you studied it in your class, and it's a really great example. I'll show you a couple of other ones to compare it to as well. Okay, so the sun dance. I'm going to come back to that idea in a minute. The sun dance was a sacred dance, and it was prohibited by the government, so it was sort of had to be hidden. Okay, but what are some things you see on here? You see teepees and buffalo and chieftains with long headdresses. Okay, things that are typical of the Native Americans, in this case, the Shoshone tribe. I wanted to throw in a couple of others to get a kind of sense of this as a common object. It's not just like there's one. This is a very beautiful one. I think winter counts. And so winter counts would be a record of seasons or time, and done by shamans. I know there's a lot of your Indigenous Americas set has connections to shamans, which were like medicine men. Okay, but here we go. This is the part I wanted to talk about, that the sun dance was a sacred dance, and it became outlawed, and so it was like this sort of it went underground, and the wolf dance was a dance that was fine, that was fine to depict that. So the two dances kind of became conflated or became combined in a way, and then that was something that could be produced without getting in trouble. Okay, so here's some nice details. You could see the war chieftains, and kind of zooming in. I was just reading the essay on Khan Academy Smart History, and I was really impressed with the essay on this one. So I think you, if you haven't read that, you definitely have to go on. But there's a portrait of the artist. And I guess the really important part of this was that, yes, the Shoshone made these, but then once they had contact and the worlds were combining and clashing in many cases, that tourists started showing up and wanting to collect these. And so the art became done in the direction of tourists. So we're really not looking in on a historical thing as much as something was produced for tourists. And where it says native identity there, really what that means is he's dealing in stereotypes. Like, what is the touristic picture of Native Americans? What do they want, basically? It's really the same as today, giving tourists what they want. I think it's interesting how many of our artists in our set deal somehow in stereotypes. And I was going to just, you may or may not have seen this work, but it's a Native American artist from the contemporary set. And even though we couldn't do all the contemporary works, I'd love you to go explore this work. And you can even see that it's in triptych format, like the triptych of the Renaissance altarpiece we have in our set. But you have a lot of imagery in here, and then you can see on the top, there's all of these sports memorabilia that relate to Native Americans, like Cleveland Indians or Atlanta Braves. And you may know, because I know here in California, there's been a lot of rethinking about what really should be on school mascots. And in some cases, there's been changing of school mascots. So you know a little bit about that. But if you go into the imagery on the work itself, it's lots of things from newspaper clippings and records of the realities of things that are going on reservations, and they're deep, serious social issues, social problems. Okay, so that's a really wonderful work. I hope you get to explore it. Okay. So let's see. We have here two works that are both worn, can be worn. Yes, although the hide painting was often displayed on walls, I mean, that's how they are now, but the hide paintings could be wrapped around you. And then on the left, you can see the place, the kind of slit on the top to, you know, slide your head through to wear in that regard. And both are conveying information about the societies. So I think this is a pretty good comparison. Okay, let's look at this one. Okay, now you got to experience this work yesterday on the left, and you know that that's just a fragment of a long work, and that work is really about one historical event, the coming of the preparations of William the Conqueror, the travel to England, and the Battle of Hastings. Okay, whereas the one on the right is a more generalized work about the life of the Shoshone tribe. I have seen one work, which I don't have in today's presentation, that is a record of the Battle of Little Bighorn with Custer. It's a very interesting, Native American version of that. You could probably find that on the internet. Okay, now our last comparison of the day is with Hunters in the Snow. And I'm wondering what you're thinking right now. I like this comparison. It shows life in two places. So let me refresh your memory on Hunters in the Snow. And I do want to let you know that this is one of my very favorite works. Sometimes teachers don't tell you what their favorite works is. Do you know which works of your teacher is their favorite? It's always an interesting thing to ask. Okay. But here is a beautiful piece in many ways. I like to study this piece in terms of foreground, middle ground, and background. Something going on, but it's incredibly designed. If you took art or ever had art class, that the composition and design of this piece is just really, really amazing. And those crows and the wintry landscape, the trees, the matrix of trees, very beautiful. And I know what it's like to slog through the snow. I mean, I live in California, we don't have snow. I can see it on the distant mountains, but just from trips and stuff, slogging through the snow is, you can really feel the wear and tear on these guys, on the hunters. They did not have a good day. They're not coming back with lots of stuff. The dogs are tired, but yet right behind them, they have that roaring fire. There's so much beautiful narrative going on in this work, and such a wonderful eye to detail. This work was one of a series of works that was about the seasons. Okay, and also out on the ice. People are out on the ice. Some of them are commuting or doing their work. Some of them are playing. There's a game called golf, and someone's playing it out there. It's sort of a mixture of hockey and golf. There's funny things going on, and Bruegel is one reason I love him so much is he has a great sense of humor, and there's people that have fallen down, and there's people that are making mischief, and there's all kinds of things to see in this picture. Okay, and then in the background, you have an alpine landscape. But Peter Bruegel never visited the Alps, so that's all really from imagination. And I love the way that one crow alighting from the tree kind of ties together the foreground and the background. It's a really wonderful piece. So what would be some of your connections between the two works if you did a comparison, if you wrote about each? You'd have to know a lot about each. At the same time, it's life. right? It's a portrait of life in each society in a different way. Okay. So here is one of my recommendations for you is that you go to the website Inside Bruegel, because you're able to go far, far into the background on the Bruegel works and find things, go see who's down on the ice, for example, and what's happening to people down on the ice. There's lots to look at, and there's lots to laugh at as well. He was an artist that had a wonderful sense of humor in showing daily life. We could all use some humor now. Okay, so we are going to end the day by reviewing the homework from yesterday, the Psalter of Louis IX. Okay, so this was a very challenging FRQ because you had quite a lot of tasks. So on the function of the text, what I came up with is, of course, this type of a Bible is an illustrated Bible with lots of scenes. And so one of the ideas was really instruction of how to be a good ruler. As you see on the top, the mother on the left and the son on the right. The son's still a boy, but he's going to be king. How do you prepare someone for that? And also this idea of this was a luxury item, of course. There's lots of gold, gold leaf rubbed on, and it's a super precious object. So it has a lot of prestige in that way. Visual characteristic of the folio, this particular folio, remember folio is a page. And so what I had was the flatness of the gold background, and then also the flatness of the relative flatness of the style. It is, Allison talked about the classical style yesterday. This is not the classical style, right? This was the new style that emerged with Christianity that was more abstract and symbolic and not too concerned with conveying, realistic things, as was the classical style. Okay. So then we're talking about now what was influencing the way this work was influenced by other traditions. And what I came up with was the stained glass. You can kind of see how stained glass, or the partitioning, it has that partitioned look of stained glass, and then the way the frames go over their heads as if it's a partition of a stained glass. And then architecture is very influenced by architecture, which you could see running through there. And then in the final part is the idea that this is a patron page. It both has the patron and the owner of the book, Louis IX, on top. And then on the bottom, you see the monk and the scribe from the workshop, because at this moment, the production of manuscripts was really moving from monasteries, where it had been in the Romanesque era, in the scriptoriums of monasteries were where these books were produced. And then in the 1200s in Paris, there's this kind of flowering of culture, a mini Renaissance, if you will, and the book production ramped up through workshops. So there was workshops spread around the city of Paris doing this. So this is quite a good, deep FRQ where you really could go into a lot of detail. Okay, so what I have for you is an FRQ, and this one is from your AP Classroom. So you might have seen it or you might not, but I'd like you to take a picture of this with your camera phone and give it some thought. And tomorrow, Allison Napier will review it. I wish you all a happy day. I'm so excited about the coming AP test. It's going to be a challenge, but because you know it so well, it's going to be very satisfying. This is John Gunnan, Newport Beach, California. Until next time.